Okay, 6 o'clock. It's time to get started. Shalom, everyone. As some of you may hear, I'm getting over a cold. So if my voice is a little shaky, then please forgive me. I also just wanted to announce that this is the first in a series of what I believe are 18 shiurim over the upcoming weeks between now and Pesach, for Torah in Motion, featuring different speakers, all dealing with Inyana Diyomar issues related to Pesach. And I'm very honored and privileged to launch this beginning of this speaker series. So as I guess we've done in the past, when we've learned together, I'm happy to take any questions. Best, I think, to write them as they occur to you in the comments, or to hold them for the end. And I will have time at the end to answer any questions. So in this shiur, which is a shiur in preparation for the concept of the day of Pesach and the Inyana Diyoma, the work, the Avodat Hayom involved, excuse me, in preparing for Pesach, I chose to speak on two topics that are near to and dear to my heart and that intersect: the idea of place, of layered place, specifically places in Tanakh and in Jewish history that often have multiple layers of experience building one on top of the other. And through those different experiences, place assumes a certain identity, a character of its own. So the place we'll be talking about today is Goshen, not a place of tremendous layered experience. There are many other places with far more layered experiences, but Goshen is a good place to focus on when discussing Pesach. And the Shvatim, the tribes of Israel, and the tribe that most strongly intersects with Goshen, the tribe of Yehuda, the tribe of Judah. So through that dual lens of place and of character of Goshen and of Yehuda, I hope to try and dig a little bit deeper into what Geula, what redemption might mean for us on a personal and on a national level in this upcoming Zman Cherutenu, this upcoming Moed, the Chag of our freedom and of our redemption. So I'd like to just start with a quick survey of where we meet the place Goshen in Tanakh. And so we'll look at the first occasion where we have to meet Goshen. This is in the 45th chapter of Genesis in Bereshit Mem-He, where Yosef is the one, Joseph, who has been installed as the Tzafnat Paneach, as the second in command in Egypt, has exposed himself to his brothers as Yosef, and they are reeling from that piece of news. And he immediately instructs them to go back to Canaan, go back up to Yaakov, to our father, and tell him, Ko Amar Bincha Yosef, so says Yosef, Samani Elokim la'adon l'chol Mitzrayim, R'da elai al ta'amod. It is time for you to come to me, because God has placed me in this plum position in Egypt. So descend to me, don't stay where you are. V'yashavta be'eretz Goshen. When you come, then you will dwell in the land of Goshen. Vayita karov elai, and you'll be in my proximity. I might not be able to sojourn with you or to live with you, given my station in Egypt, but we will be in close proximity. Ato v'necho v'nei v'necha, your entire clan, Father Yaakov, and all of your possessions. You should bring everything down with you with this prescience that this is going to be quite a long sojourn in Goshen, and I shall support you, I will provide for you, and that no one will suffer, because we know that Canaan at this time was suffering a serious famine, which is what necessitated his brothers descending to Egypt in the first place. And so soon after, Yosef instructs his brothers to return to Yaakov. Just a few verses later, in the same chapter, we see that Paro, of the time of Yosef, he reaffirms this offer. Ve'akol nishma beit paro lemor ba'u achei Yosef. Pharaoh's court got wind of the fact that Joseph's family had arrived, and this was something that was positive in this particular Pharaoh's uh, um, uh, idea. And his court also thought that this was a marvelous thing. V'yomer paro Yosef, emor elachecha zot asu ta'anu et bi'erchem u'lechu v'u arza Canaan. Just as Yosef had told his brothers, Paro reinforces the message, go back to the land of Canaan, and I want you to retrieve your family, your father and your father's household, and bring them back to me. Ukhu et avichem bet batechem uvo elai ve'etna lechem et tuv eretz Mitzrayim, and bring them to back down to Egypt, and I will give you at Tuv Eretz Mitzrayim, the best part that Egypt has to offer, and they will eat from the fat of the land. Now, he doesn't here specify the land of Goshen, but he does. If we're going to collapse the two together, then we would say that Yosef offered Goshen. We don't know too much about the quality of Goshen, but Paro offered the best that the land of Egypt has to offer. And we'll see soon how the two kind of collapse one into the other, such that Jacob and his family receive this great Yerusha, this great holding within Egypt, the lands of Goshen. And he reiterates here, Kituv kol eretz Mitzrayim lachem hu. Jacob, you fathered my beloved Yosef, the one who I so value and who will essentially save Egypt. So I would like to offer you the best that Egypt has to offer. And when the brothers go back to Yaakov in Eretz Canaan, Yaakov agrees. He wants to see his son. He understands that there's a necessity for this journey to be made, as heavy of an understanding as this is, right? If you think about the background of all that had been promised to Yaakov in terms of his legacy, in terms of the promise of Eretz Yisrael, the land that would be named after him for his progeny. And here he is told to descend to Egypt, and God in the interim appears to him in Beersheba and says, do not worry, I shall be with you. You will die in Egypt. Yosef will cover your eyes, but you will return to the land of Israel. So he comes with that promise of an eventual return. But for our purposes, for the shiur and the title of the shiur, I get to source number 3, which is really, I think, the crux of what it is I'd like to talk about. That Yaakov, in his descent to Egypt, makes very deliberate preparations. Ve'et Yehuda shalach lefanav. He sends Yehuda in anticipation, before him, El Yosef, to Yosef. Yosef had remained in Egypt, and he sends Yehuda lahorot lefanav Goshna, to show or to teach, or in this translation, to point the way to Goshen. Vayavo arza Goshen. And they arrived in the land of Goshen. There were certain distinct preparations that had to be made that Yaakov felt were necessary before this journey that wasn't just a visit after which he would return to Eretz Yisrael. And so I'd like this to sit with us with all of the potential ramifications of what this may mean of Yaakov specifically sending Yehuda to Goshen to prepare the way. And we'll look in just a bit, after we finish surveying the sources, we'll look just a bit at to what the deeper concept here may be. If for whatever reason you don't see the sources or things aren't coming in clearly, please do unmute yourself and let me know, because I'm assuming that the sources are here in my shared screen. Okay, so the next source that we have here in the subsequent chapter, in the 46th chapter of Bereshit, is that Yosef tells his family, who has come to greet him now, he's had his meeting now with Yaakov. He says, soon you will have an audience with Paro, and I'm going to instruct you to tell Paro that you are shepherds by occupation. And by telling him that, and by telling him that you have brought all of your livestock with you, that will determine, that will enforce the separation that I intend there to be between my family and broader Egypt. ויאמר יוסף אל אחיו ואל בית אביו, אעלה ואגיד לפרעה ואומרי אליו, אחי ובית אבי אשר בארץ כנען באו אליי. I am going now to inform Pharaoh that all of you have arrived. ואנשים רועי צאן, this is what I shall be telling him, that the people who have come are shepherds, כי אנשי מקנה היו, וצאנם ובקרם וחלה שלהם הביאו, and that they have brought all of their flocks with them. And I want you to reinforce this message. When Paro says, what is it that you do? What is your occupation? We are people of the animals. We engage in animal husbandry. We breed livestock, as it translates here. I want you to say this is part of your heritage. This is part of who you are as a clan, so that you will be able to remain in the land of Goshen. It's important that you be able to stay there. Now here this translation is, for all shepherds are abhorrent to Egyptians. There are different ways to understand this idea of Egypt and their relationship to sheep at this time. The most classic way to understand it is Rashi, who says that the Egyptians worshipped sheep, so that anyone who would be handling the sheep would kind of be, or anyone who was too engaged with sheep would be off-putting to Egyptians. It should be known that archaeology has determined otherwise, in that those who think, and the Ibn Ezra goes on to expand on Rashi and says, do you know India? Ibn Ezra says, in India they worship cows and they don't eat cows, and this is I presume true through our contemporary time, and they revere cows. Now he extrapolated this pasuk, or that idea of India, back onto this pasuk and drew a connection and said that in Egypt, sheep were so revered that there was no interaction with them. That's just not true. In all excavations from the 18th, 19th, and 20th dynasties of Egypt, which would have been the time period from Hyksos on, actually, from one can say the 17th century BCE up through the Iron Age, which brings us to 1000 BCE in ancient Egypt. Sheep were consumed. They were consumed for their meat. They were sacrificed to gods. So the zoo archaeology bears this out. But at Bad Babad, it is true that there were certain cults that revered, like within the pantheon of Egypt, that did revere sheep, including one that is located in what is believed to be Goshen, or in the vicinity of Goshen. So what this verse is saying is that if you say that you are shepherds, then Goshen is yours. However that may play out, right? Either that it is sacred land, so that the sacred animal can be raised there, or that we are put off by people who engage too much with sheep, so we'd rather you be separate. What Yosef was assuring for himself is that they would physically and culturally remain separate from Egypt by being in Goshen. And then we see this idea of Goshen as a separate space, distinctly Israelite, played out over the whole story of the Shiabud, the enslavement in Egypt, and the redemption from Egypt, where already you see here, I'm in Sefer Shmot, I'm in the book of Exodus, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to bring the Makat Arov, which is translated in a strange way here as swarms of insects, but is actually, according to Rashi, and most of the prime commentaries, as wild animals, that the wild animals would enter into Egyptian space, but Goshen would be left separate. V'hifleti bayomahu et eretz Goshen asher ami omed aleha. I shall make sure that the Arov does not enter into Goshen. It's a distinct geographical area, like a ghetto, and the Arov shall not enter there. L'man te'da ki ani Hashem b'karav haaretz. The fact that the Bnei Yisrael were separated allowed for this phenomenon with the makot, with the plagues, that there would be certain plagues that would just not enter into Israelite space. Not only with Arov, but also with the plague of hail, with Barad. Rak be'eretz Goshen, asher sham b'nei Yisrael lo haya Barad. It could be argued that were Goshen to be, let's say, a little ghetto or a small neighborhood surrounded by broader Egypt, then the miracle would be even heightened. Very, very few biblical geographers believe Goshen to be of that nature. We'll see soon where Goshen is located. It is indeed distinct and separate within Egypt. But whatever the case, these makot show that that Goshen remained distinctive and that the Israelites remained in Goshen and they were not harmed by these makot. Now, before we go into more deeply into where Goshen is in Egypt, I want to point out that geography in Tanakh is a very mixed bag, in that sometimes we know exactly where our location is, and sometimes we have just suggestions, and sometimes we get very, very confused. If you want to understand just how confusing things can be, I direct you to the appendix to the first chapter that I wrote in my book on tribes, where I talk about the Nachala of Reuven. And I show I attempt to show how in different locations throughout Tanakh, the Nachala of Reuven is described radically differently, and how you can have even one parcel of land that's going to be described differently in different contexts. So we find the same thing when it comes to Goshen. Up until now, I think it's fairly clear that the Psukim are directing us to consider Goshen as a part of Mitzrayim, that you, Jacob, are told to descend to Goshen with your broader clan and with your animals, and come join me, Yosef says, and I will be in close proximity to you. However, if we did a survey, if I pulled out my trusty concordancia, which I do all the time back here, and I surveyed where Goshen appears in Tanakh, it is not only in the context of Bereshit and Shmot in this Mitzrayim context, we also find Goshen in the context of Sefer Yehoshua 3-4 times, where Yehoshua, as we know, is the inheritor of the mantle of leadership of Moshe, brings Bnei Yisrael into Eretz Yisrael, and he fights a series of battles against the indigenous peoples of Eretz Yisrael before each of the tribes goes off on his own to conquer his own territory. Yoshua and the collective Am Yisrael fight against allegiances of enemy kings. The first one that he fights against are the 5 Amorite kings of the south. And Yoshua, in the 10th chapter of Yoshua, deals them a heavy blow. Vayakem Yoshua mi Kadesh Barnea va'ad Aza. So Kadesh Barnea and Aza are in the south of Israel, Aza, as we all know, on the Mediterranean coast. It would become a Philistine city. That call Eretz Goshen va'ad Giv'on, and the whole land of Goshen until Giv'on. Now, Giv'on is more centrally located within the broader, let's say, Jerusalem area, one can argue. But if just based on what I'm looking at here in the description of Yoshua, I'm not that far off from the Goshen of Breshit and Shmot. Here, let me show you a map. Okay, this is a map that was put together by Professor Yoel Elitzor when he's discussing this dichotomy between Eretz Goshen, which we have in the first sources we saw, which is where Yosef and Yehuda apparently met, where Yaakov over here in Beersheba would have sent forward Yehuda, or he was in Hebron, and he was sent Yehuda over to pave the way, lahorot et haderech, in Goshen, so that for most biblical geographers, Eretz Goshen is what we call now the Nile Delta, which is Lower Egypt, not Upper Egypt. Upper Egypt is further down in the south, and the Nile runs between Lower Egypt and Upper Egypt. But this would have been a reasonable place for the Israelites to have settled. First of all, check out its proximity to the land of Canaan. And second of all, at that time, depends who you're going to ask, and this year is most definitely not about the historicity of the Exodus story, nor is it about the historicity of Yosef as Safnat Paneach in Mitzrayim, which would, of course, have been centuries apart. But for those who would posit that Yosef would have been in the Hyksos or 18th dynasty of Egypt, putting him in the 17th, 16th centuries, 15th centuries BCE, then Yosef would have ruled from Thebes, which would have been right here at the juncture of the delta, of the Nile Delta with the Nile. So it would have put Israel in close proximity with Yosef and his need to be in Pharaoh's court. So going back to our question about Yehoshua, is Goshen, as was described over here, that Joshua conquered Kadesh Barnea until Aza and the whole lands of Goshen? Does that mean here, Aza being located over here, that he continued on and conquered into Egypt? Or far more likely that Yoshua was engaged in the battle in Eretz Canaan proper against the 5 Amorite kings of the south, and that Goshen is most likely an alternative Goshen located in Eretz Yisrael. Don't be thrown by that, because it happens all the time. For instance, we will have a Beit Lechem Yehuda over here, and then around 15 minutes from where I live, a Beit Lechem Glilit. We'll have a Beit Shemesh Yehuda, and then around 35 minutes from where I live, in closer proximity to Tzfat, we'll have a Beit Shemesh Glilit. So we'll have different locations that have the same name, but located, but just with this repeating the name. So you will have a Goshen that is called Goshen Mitzrayim, and you'll have a Goshen of Eretz Canaan as well. And this is borne out in subsequent chapters of Yehoshua, where the location of Goshen seems to really be set in an Eretz Canaan, an Eretz Yisrael, Negev context. Vayikach Yoshua et kol haaretz hazot, hahar, v'et kol hanegev, et kol Eretz Goshen, v'et hashvela. Look, we have Goshen sandwiched between the Negev and the Shvela. So it doesn't make much sense then to think of our much earlier Goshen. And then in the extensive city list of the tribal allotment of Yehuda, of Nachalat Yehuda, as delivered to us in Yehoshua Perek Tet Vav. Some of these where we know exactly where they're located: Dana, Kiryat Sana, Hidvir, the Anav, the Eshtemoa, you can go visit. Eshtemoa is down here. The Goshen, the Cholon, the Gilo. So here again, we have the place named Goshen in this context, not modern day Cholon, not the one near Tel Aviv, and not modern day Gilo, the one near Yerushalayim, but ancient cities of Yehuda that would have been in his ancestral allotment, which was this area of Eretz Yisrael, Goshen included. So we'll see why this is relevant. It wasn't just an interesting tangent that there are two Goshens, because the Midrash, as I love to bring Midrash, tends to collapse things together in concept. And we'll see how it does that soon. And the Midrash is not so interested in two distinct Goshens. But as always, I try to wear my intellectual honesty cap, and then also wear my Torah guiding cap, and then also wear my Talmud Torah Midrash cap, and balance all of those caps together. So in this case, for intellectual honesty's sake, we're going to look at the two different Goshens. And here I'll just show one more map. This is the division of the tribal allotment of Yehuda. And you can see here that that Goshen is in this is in proximity of Eshtemoa. We can't say exactly where it is. It hasn't been identified conclusively as a place like Eshtemoa has, but it would, by biblical geographical accounts, be much more in the vicinity of the Dead Sea than it would in the vicinity of Egypt. Okay, all of that said, now I can put on my other cap, and that is the cap of Midrash, where Midrash is, of course, aware of these two different Goshens and wants to see a translation or an imprint, let's say, of the Kedusha of Goshen in Eretz Israel, which would have the holiness of Eretz Israel, and in a way imprint that on the Kedusha, on the Goshen of Egypt, and see in a way a layered place, a place that we met first in the book of Genesis, and that we re-met in Exodus, and now we re-met again in a different context in Joshua. Okay, so let's look at how Radak does this. Radak here is commenting in the context of Yehoshua, Sefer Yehoshua. And Radak says, Eretz Goshen, this Goshen that Yehoshua conquered in Nahalat Yehuda. So first, he's going to be intellectually honest. In ze Goshen shel Mitzrayim. Let's not get confused. The whole Goshen that we've been familiar with, because we go to Shul on Shabbatot and we hear about the Goshen, the much more familiar Goshen, which is where Bnei Yisrael sojourned when they were in Egypt, is the Goshen of Mitzrayim. And this is a different Goshen, the Goshen of Yehoshua. Uvidrash, but he can't help himself, the Radak. He says, in a drash, Omer, ki haya Goshen shel Eretz Mitzrayim. That indeed, when Yehoshua is talking in Perek Yud Aleph Pasuk Tet Zayin, Vayikach Yehoshua et kol haaretz hazot tahar ve'et kol hanegev et kol Eretz Goshen, and he conquered Eretz Goshen, that indeed that we're talking about the Goshen of Mitzrayim. V'hi nivlat b'toch arei Yisrael, and it was swallowed up, or it was in a way consumed by within the cities of Israel. This is kind of like a maximalist stance for what the boundaries of Israel would have looked like, so much so as to include the Nile Delta. Kemosha Amar, and his proof text for this is Vaya'al Likrat Aviv Goshna. Vaya'al Likrat Aviv Goshna is Vaya'al Yosef. When Yosef went to meet his father, the verb, when Yaakov had descended to Goshen to have this reunion with Yosef, and Yosef in turn ascended, the verb used is ascend. Now, I'm going to argue here that Yosef is going to ascend, even then, although again, we call this Lower Egypt, he's literally ascending, he's heading north from Thebes to meet with his father. Again, this is all conjecture because we don't know exactly where Yosef is located. However, the Midrash Chazal would like to read into this verb, Vaya'al, Melamed Shahi Ba'aliyah Klapei Eretz Yisrael, that it was a spiritual ascent. Goshen had the Kedushat Haaretz. It had some kinds of a holiness to it, a holiness of being Eretz Yisrael adjacent, let's say. ובזכות שהלך יהודה בשליחות אביו להורות לפניו, זכה שיהיה לחלקו ארץ גושן שהיא טובה. In merit of Yehuda following through with his father's missive to go and teach the way or show the way to Goshen, then he merited that the lands of that Eretz Goshen would be in his nachala. Yeah, I'm sorry, there's just some like lines here. Okay, so then he would merit that Yehuda would merit that his nachala would extend all the way to the Nile Delta, which by the way makes sense because Yehuda inherited the entire Philistine coast here and the entire Negev. So if any tribe would be inheriting what would be the Sinai and then the Delta, it would be Yehuda. Okay, so that's a maximalist stance, which is picked up by the Kuzari. Now, for those history buffs, I wish I would have checked this beforehand. Rav David Kimchi, I believe, is 13th century Provence, and I believe the Kuzari is 12th century Spain. So I think the Kuzari even precedes Radak to different locations, although linked in terms of their outlook is how I was taught. Provence and Spain were linked. And the Kuzari, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, in his book of philosophy, in his discussion of prophecy, is saying that prophecy can't exist outside of the land of Israel. Only it can exist outside the land of Israel if someone who is giving prophecy is giving his prophecy concerning the land of Israel. So look at how he puts it. Kol mi shenitnabe lo nitnabe ki im ba o ba'avura. Anyone who prophesies is either prophesying in the land of Israel or about the land of Israel. When he gets to his discussion of Yirmiyahu, and Yirmiyahu was the prophet at the time of the first destruction of the destruction of the first temple in the 6th century, and much of his nevuah, his prophecy, was delivered in Egypt. Yirmiyahu b'Mitzrayim, when Yirmiyahu delivered his nevuah in Mitzrayim, look at what the Kuzari says in a startling way. Ba uba avura. He was both in it, implying in Eretz Israel, and also about it. Now that's strange because Egypt is Egypt and Eretz Israel is Eretz Israel. So in order to reconcile this strange comment or to make sense of this strange twist of the Kuzari, I bring you here the Otzer Nechmad. The Otzer Nechmad is a commentary on the Kuzari. It's a commentary that was written in the 1700s. I hope my voice is not coming in too raspy, but it's a commentary written in the 1700s. I had to look this up because I'd never heard of it before, by a rabbi named Yisrael ben Moshe Halevi Zamusht. He was from Poland and he was renowned as a mathematician, and most of his works were on mathematics and astronomy. And he also additionally wrote some works in Torah, including a commentary on the Kuzari. And this is what he has to say. That it would seem that what the Kuzari is intending here is that there were parts of Egypt that were related or adjacent or connected to Eretz Israel. ודומה לזה במדרש על הפסוק ויקח יהושע את כל הארץ הזאת, ההר ואת כל הנגב ואת כל ארץ הגושן. And he brings in here the same drash that the Radak was bringing up in the context of Yehoshua, that Yehoshua in his conquest conquered Eretz HaGoshen, meaning that perhaps he did conquer Egypt. Shezohi Goshen Mitzrayim, that this is indeed the Goshen of Egypt. V'hi muvlad b'chalko shel Yehuda, and this was then absorbed by the Nachala of Yehuda. Kmo she'amru vaya'al likrat aviv Goshna v'lamed shehi ba'aliyah klapei Eretz Yisrael. He is reiterating here the idea that Goshen, Mitzrayim, the Goshen of Egypt, is indeed part of the land of Israel in some sense. Either it was conquered by Joshua and then kind of absorbed into the Nachala of Yehuda, yeah, that's essentially what he's saying. He's reiterating this drash. Now, this midrash is, I believe, based on an earlier midrash or an earlier idea unrelated to the context of Yehoshua. It is a midrash that establishes for us a certain extension of holiness outside of the borders of the land of Israel, which is quite astounding. Or one can say an extension of holiness that expands the borders of the land of Israel. And for that, let's look at Pirkei's Rabbi Eliezer, meaning that we're not talking about like shagrirut, like some kind of an embassy in Washington D.C. The Israeli embassy in Washington D.C. Does not have the holiness of the land of Israel. It might, on some political level, have might belong to Israel, but it doesn't have the holiness of the land of Israel. Here we're talking about the extension of the holiness. Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha Omer, Sarah Haita Eshet Paro. Remember the story of when Abraham was tested in the land of Israel, in the land of Canaan, by a famine, and he took his wife Sarah with him down to Egypt. Me'ahavato ta katav la b'shtar ketubata kol mamona. This is very sweet. In writing her shtar ketubah, which we know obviously, is an anachronism. We're not talking about literally a ketubah. We're saying that Pharaoh gifted her with all of his money. He was so enamored with her. He so loved her. Ben kesef, ben zahav, ben avadim, v'karkaot. He gave her so much wealth. V'katav la et eretz Goshen la'achuza. And specifically, he gave her the land of Goshen as a possession. Lefichach yashvu b'nei Yisrael be'eretz Goshen be'eretz Sarah imam. And that is why eventually, many hundreds of years later, the descendants of Sarah would find their home in Eretz Goshen because it was theirs to begin with, because there was a certain homecoming involved. That was a land that on some level was, according to the Midrash here, was gifted to Sarah. Now, to make sense of this Midrash, I would say that the point of this Midrash, the function of this Midrash, is to explain why is to reinforce Bnei Yisrael's ownership or placement in Goshen, that not only was it a reasonable and practical place for them to be, it would ensure their separation from Egypt and it would put them in close proximity to Yosef, but also it expands Bnei Yisrael's place in Egypt with a sense of a certain holiness, that it was something that was given to their ancestress as her inheritance, or as we saw later, it was claimed by Yehoshua and conquered by Yehoshua and became part of Yehuda's inheritance. So therefore, the experience of Bnei Yisrael in Mitzrayim is not entirely foreign, because it carries with it the holiness of Eretz Yisrael, or the holiness of the inheritance of our ancestors. So with that in mind, I'd like to go back to our starting verse about how Yaakov sent Yehuda, that Yehuda shalach lefanav. We'll go back and we'll look at the verse together. That Yehuda shalach lefanav el Yosef lehorot lefanav Goshna. Yehuda Yaakov sent Yehuda before him to Yosef to show the way to Goshen, Vayavo Eretz Goshen, and then all of the Bnei Yisrael, whoever was left of the 70 clan that were still in Eretz Yisrael, would then go down to Goshen. And so on that verse, there is a famous midrash which is quoted by Rashi in a slightly different form, but I'd like to look at the original, and then I'll paraphrase Rashi, where the Midrash says, "Vet Yehuda shalach lefanav." Yaakov sent Yehuda. Rabbi Chanina b'rei Rabbi Achav Rabbi Chanina. Chad Amar, there's a machloket here. One's going to take a very eminently practical opinion here. Why did Yaakov send Yehuda to Goshen? Latkin lo beit dira. You need to send someone as an advanced team to make sure that the groundwork is set, that we have proper lodgings, that we have a proper infrastructure, that all of our needs will be taken care of. V'chad and the other opinion says it's not just the infrastructure, the physical infrastructure that's necessary. It's the spiritual groundwork that needs to be laid. Ladkin lo beit vad sheyehe moreh bo divrei Torah v'sheyu hashvatim lomdim bo. To arrange a beit midrash, to start building afresh the academy or the Torah or the spiritual fountainhead that would have to be uprooted from Eretz Yisrael and moved elsewhere and moved into Galut. And the person to do this, the right man for the job, was apparently Yehuda. And we'll get to very soon why I feel Yehuda was the right man to launch Bnei Yisrael into Galut. And then hopefully I'll have time also to explain why Yehuda is also the right man for the job to launch Bnei Yisrael back out of Galut. But first, before doing that, I'd like to look at a wrinkle that the Midrash introduces here, a very tantalizing Midrash that seems to come out of nowhere. But on this same verse, the verse that Yehuda was the one who was sent to prepare the way for the Bnei Yisrael's experience in this land of Goshen, this land that had an inherent kedusha to it, the Midrash argues. Again, either a kedusha from Sarah Imenu or what would become the kedushat haaretz when Yehoshua would conquer Goshen Mitzrayim. So let's look at the Tanchuma. The Tanchuma here is commenting on the same verse. Yaakov sends Yehuda before him to Goshen. Yilamdenu Rabbeinu. When we learn the following, al haner b'motzei Shabbat. Random question stuck in the middle of the Tanchuma. But the question is, at what point can you actually say the blessing Borei Morei Ha'esh when you're doing Havdalah on Shabbat? At what strength does the candle have to be at? Kach shanu rabatenu ein mevarchin al haner ad sheyeh otol le'oro. That the candle must have significant strength. It can't be the single wick candle that we're used to from Hadlakat Nerot Shabbat, that usher in Shabbat. It has to be a dual wick. It has to have significant strength, which to a certain degree one can say might mimic that midrash that we're familiar with about how Adam Harishon was given the gift of fire on Motzei Shabbat by learning how to make fire from rubbing two sticks or two stones together. And we need, therefore, the industry of fire, the strength of fire, before we can bless Borei Morei Ha'esh on the fire that will usher us into the weekday. What does any of this have to do with that verse that Yoshua shalach lefanav, that he sent Yehoshua before him? I think that you can already associate what the import of this verse is. It is the leaving of the promised land towards exile. It is the leaving of Shabbat towards the darkness of the whole of the mundanity of the week. And the Imrei Emet was the fourth Ger Rebbe. He has a really, really interesting story, which unfortunately I don't have time to go into now. Maybe in a future share, I'll be able to bring more of the Torah of the Imrei Emet. But he says the following on this midrash. The Imrei Emet, like his grandfather, the Sfad Emet, would pick a midrash and explain the deeper Hasidic ideas behind this midrash. And he says the following. This is the connection. What's the connection between asking when do we make the blessing on the Havdalah candle to the verse Delahorot lefanav Goshna, that Yehuda was meant to show the way to Goshen. De'ita barashi, Rashi, as I had said, he points out the Bereshit Rabbah, he brings the Bereshit Rabbah, and that the whole point of sending Yehuda before was not that original opinion of Bereshit Rabbah to make sure that we have proper lodgings, but to make sure that Bnei Yisrael would have the proper infrastructure, that the yeshivot would be there, that the Beit Midrash would be there, that the mikvah would be there, that everything that Bnei Yisrael would need for their spiritual well-being would be in place. L'taken lo Beit Talmud shemisham tetzei hora'ah lehorot lefanav goshna. It's derived from the strange word to show the way, to guide the way. And tzrichim lihityagea limtzo haor shenistar. You need to exert effort in order to uncover the hidden light. Ad sheyutol le'oro, until you can actually benefit from the light. It's an avodah. It's a work that Yehuda had to do to, in a sense, uncover the hidden light of Galut. That Yehuda shalach lehorot lefanav Goshna, to uncover or to light the way to Goshen, to discover the possibilities of Goshen. Limtzo haor shel ner mitzvah v'torah or, to uncover that potential and that light. What I wanted to just point out here as we pivot in the 15 minutes that we have left is that what I've tried to show up until now is the layered element of Goshen is manufactured for us in a way by our sages who want to have that light of Goshen already tamun, already hidden in Goshen for Yehuda to uncover. If Goshen belonged, in a sense, to the descendants of Sarah, then Yehuda would come and uncover it, and its potential would then be fully realized in the days of Yehoshua when he would conquer it and it would become part of maximalist Eretz Yisrael. That, I think, is the concept of the Midrashic read here of Goshen, and specifically of Yehuda descending to Goshen to uncover the light of Goshen. Now, in the remaining time I have, I'm going to have to skip dessert. I was going to put dessert in right now. Dessert for me is the Bnei Yisachar, but I'm going to have to, Bnei Yisachar, I'm going to have to skip on that because we don't have time for that. I would like to try and answer the question, why specifically Yehuda was the one who was sent to pave the way to improve the experience, or to make the exile experience of the children of Israel palatable and manageable, until the point where he would be the one to introduce the Bnei Yisrael back into the Geula experience, the redemptive experience. Why Yehuda is the pivot man, as it were. Why he's the one who specifically is charged by Yaakov to bring us into Galut, or to show us the best that Galut can offer, and then to take us out of Galut. I will, of course, point out that Yehuda is the ultimate Galut name. It is the name that encompasses the Bnei Yisrael Galut experience. We do not call ourselves Yisrael, or I can say perhaps over the last few decades or the last 80 years, we have started to have an emergent identity of Yisrael. But for thousands of years, we have been identified as Yehuda, as Jews, obviously because the tribe of Judah maintained their identity in Galut, where many of the other tribes lost their identity. But it is a distinctly Galut identity and name, Jews and Judaism as well, not to be found outside of its tribal framework within most of the stories of Tanakh. But that aside, that detail aside, I'd like to spend our remaining time together looking at Yehuda and his tribal concept and why he brought us into Galut and why he took us out. So first, I'll draw your attention. I might have to rush through some of these sources because of our time constraints. I'll draw your attention to the fact that not only did Yehuda take us to Goshen, but at least in the Midrashic concept, he also was the one who surged us out of Egypt. You'll recall that that famous story of Nachshon ben Aminadav, the prince of Judah, who was the one who surged forth into the Yam Suf to release Bnei Yisrael from their confines in Egypt and to move them further. The Gemara here says it had started by saying that it was Benjamin indeed who did this, but then Rabbi Yehuda said, no, it was my namesake Yehuda. Lo kachayama said it wasn't Binyamin. It wasn't the tribe of Binyamin who took Bnei Yisrael or who led Bnei Yisrael out of Egypt. None of the tribes were interested in being the vanguard, except for Nachshon ben Aminadav, who took the Bnei Yisrael out of Egypt. And then Yehuda, over and over again, would assume that leadership role from the Nachshon ben Aminadav entering into the waters of the Yam Suf, through Yehuda being the first in the encampment of the tribes around the tabernacle, around the Mishkan. You can just read the sources here. I'm just rushing through them. Into the land of Israel, when after the death of Yehoshua, when the tribes were confused as to who should be the leader, Yehuda is identified by the Urim V'Tumim, by God, as the tribe who should lead Bnei Yisrael in their conquest of Eretz Yisrael. So over and over again, Yehuda is not only, again, the leader to take Bnei Yisrael into Galut, but also to take them out of Egypt and into Eretz Yisrael and into the conquest of Eretz Yisrael. So he is that transitional, that pivot man, as I said. And here I'd like to explore why. I think that when we're trying to understand the makeup of one of the tribes, we always have to look at his birth story. We have to look at his conception story, sometimes even before his birth story. In this case with Yehuda, it's his birth story. And I'll say very briefly that Yehuda was born as the fourth son of Leah after a prolonged distress that Leah Imenu felt at her displacement within the family structure. She names her first three sons after her deep hope that her husband will not hate her, will accompany her, that she will find her place. And finally, when her fourth son is born, and her sister wife, literally, Rachel, has not yet had any children. When it comes to Yehuda, she says, Hapam odeh et Hashem. I shall now thank God, or I shall praise God. And she names him Yehuda, and that's when at that point, she experiences secondary infertility, which gives rise to more of the drama of the family dynamic. But in this idea of Leah naming Yehuda after her Thanksgiving, she essentially is naming him after her most dominant character. If for those of you who were with me in the series on Purim, when I spoke about Rachel, and Rachel tafsa et pelech shtika, v'chol baneha yu b'nei mistorin, that Rachel held the distaff of silence, and all of her descendants were men of mystery or women of mystery and charisma. Leah did not held a different distaff. Leah tafsa pelech hodaya. Leah's dominant trait was her ability to admit, her ability to give thanksgiving, to be modeh. And here I'm collapsing what could be an entire share into just a few minutes, but please do bear with me. The idea of hoda'ah, of thanksgiving, when you say much obliged, right? You say you are essentially admitting to reality. Somebody does you a favor and you thank them, then you are saying, I am indebted to you. I admit that you have done something for me. And it is this ability to understand reality and to admit to reality and not to deny reality, that is what makes Yehuda, who is named after Hoda'ah, after this trait of Hoda'ah, so much of the leader, that he is the Shevet, he is the tribe of Malchut, of kingship. And I'll get to that in just one second. Leah, in in her exuberance at finding her place in the family after the fourth son is born, and she feels that her place has been cemented. Now I can thank you, God. I have the confidence. I have the wherewithal to not just be running after a relationship with Yaakov, but to realize I have my place in this family. I acknowledge it, and I know what it is. Now, Yehuda, in his journey, in his growth within the family, will grow into the ultimate Baal Hoda'ah, the one who can admit most easily, the one who can make sense of reality and acknowledge reality and not hide from it. I don't have time now to go into the entire process. Again, I believe it's probably a share in and of itself of how he descended from his brother's estimation, from his family's estimation. He made a serious yirida, a serious descent in the transactional, cruel, and cold way that he sold his brother Yosef. And he fell from his brother's estimation because of his leadership role in that horrendous sale. But then we see a growth on the part of Yehuda. We see that after he diminishes his brother's worth into some kind of a betza, some kind of a transaction, and he sells, and he oversees the sale of Yosef, and immediately after that, he descends into these business transactions, and he marries the daughter of his business partner, and he then has to bury one son after another. And we know the end of this story, where Tamar, his daughter-in-law, forces him into a very stark confrontation with reality and with truth. And what is it that he says? He says, Tzadka mimeni. She is right. She is correct. This is something that's going to be echoed by his descendant David, who will say Chatati la Hashem when he's confronted by Nathan, the prophet, after his sin with Bathsheba. He will say Chatati la Hashem, just like his ancestor Yehuda said Tzadka mimeni. When he can admit to reality, then he assumes the mantle of leadership, of responsibility, of the son that Yaakov says, you must be the one to uncover the light in Galut. You will see Galut for what it is. You will see the glories of Galut. You will see the necessity of Galut. The experience of exile for the Jewish people, the numerous exiles that we have experienced, which are all symbolized by Egypt, by the Egyptian exile, which is why Pesach stands as the Chag of exile and redemption. Because of its massive symbolism, all of our exiles can be reduced to the exile, or can be seen within the exile of Egypt. Yehuda is the one who can show the light of Galut for the glory that it is, for all of the different experiences that Am Yisrael have to have in Galut. And then when the time is right, when he realizes that Galut is no longer necessary or helpful or beneficial for the Jewish people, but the time is right for Yisrael to emerge, for the Jewish people to be redeemed, to redeem themselves, and to move into a state of Geulah, into a state of redemption, then Yehuda is the one who has to take us there as well. And I'll just point out in the few minutes that I have left, where we see this most potently, where Yehuda takes responsibility. Not only does he take responsibility for his own actions with Tamar, but when Binyamin is claimed by Yosef in Egypt, remember Yosef had claimed had Shimon and Binyamin, and had held Binyamin captive, had held Shimon captive, and sent the other brothers back and said, if you want your brother Shimon back, you have to show me Binyamin, prove to me that he exists. And the brothers go back and they say to Jacob, they say to him, entrust us with Binyamin and we shall bring him back. Reuven says, if I don't bring him back, you can kill my two sons. Impetuous Reuven, the firstborn. And Yaakov just ignores him because that's a ridiculous claim. Of course, he doesn't want to kill his own grandchildren. And he realizes that Reuven, as the firstborn, is not the promised leader. It is when Yehuda steps up and says, let me take Binyamin with me, and I shall go down to Egypt, and I shall then save Shimon, and I will make sure that no harm will befall Binyamin. That Yaakov acquiesces, and I just want you to focus with me on a line here of the speech that Yehuda gives. Vayigash elav Yehuda. Vayigash and Goshen and Goshna are all language, it's all lashon of an encounter, specifically an encounter between Yosef and Yehuda. And it is a primal, almost existential encounter between these two forces within Am Yisrael of Yosef and Yehuda. And here is Yehuda's time to shine, because Yosef is a dreamer, and Yosef knows that his mother Rachel was the prime mother. Only when Yehuda can be modeh can he admit to the reality that that is indeed the case. And Yosef, you were right, and Rachel is the prime mother, and my mother Leah was only an adjunct to the family, and your mother was the prime mother. Can brotherhood truly be effective, and can harmony exist between the Shvatim? Look very, very carefully with me. Vayomer, Yehuda says to Yosef, Avdecha avi elenu, your servant, my father, Yaakov, said to us, Atem yadatem kishnayim yodali ishti. You know that my wife bore two. This is such a powerful verse, because what Yehuda is saying is that Yaakov's wife is Rachel. Yaakov's prime wife is Rachel. The loss of Yosef pretty much killed Yaakov. To lose Binyamin would be the absolute devastation, because that's what he has left of his wife, Rachel. Ramban points this out, by the way. I bring you Ramban here. We just don't have time to look at it. But it is the ultimate expression of the hoda'ah, of the admittance, of the acknowledgement of Yehuda, that he understands what reality is. He understands what the situation is. He's not going to pretend that it's otherwise, the way that his older brother Reuven had done, who championed Leah. He says, I understand how things are in this world. And that is why Yaakov will choose him to light the way down to Goshen, and why Yehuda will be the one who won't bury his head in the sand when the time comes for Geula, and will not say, oh, it's still good for us in Galut. It's still good that we remain in this place. So much beauty has been discovered here. So much light has been uncovered in Goshen. No, the time has come for us to be Nachshon ben Aminadav, to surge forth, to be the leader tribe, Yehuda says, to bring us back into our Geula, into our redemption. Yehuda Ya'aleh. Yehuda will be the one who will once again launch that conquest of Eretz Yisrael and the process of Geula. And I will just end with one idea before I take any more questions. I'll end with an idea, and then I'll give a summary of today's shiur. I find this idea very powerful. The idea of where you end off is also where you launch from. Yehuda is the tribe that brings us successfully into exile. And again, I use Goshen here as a symbol for all exile. It's the same thing in my mind as those who managed to escape from Nazi Germany and rebuild yeshivot elsewhere, right? Or those who managed to escape who managed to lay the groundwork elsewhere for a successful galut experience, a successful exile experience. That is what Yehuda does, because he was pragmatic, he saw reality for what it was, and he was able to get the job done. But Yehuda also, as the ultimate leader, the Mashiach ben David, the one who admits that as to what reality is, Chatati LaHashem, Tzadka Mimeni, is the one who admits and sees that that when the time comes to leave Galut and to enter into Geulah, to enter into that process of redemption, that he will lead us in that direction as well. So I bring you just here one other example that occurred to me, especially as a tour guide who loves to guide in the north. When I guide the Nidudei HaSanhedrin, the journey of the Sanhedrin throughout the north, and one great visionary in the model of Yehuda was Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai, who on the eve of the destruction of the second temple asked Vespasian, "Ten li Yavna v'chochmeha, give me Yavna and her sages." In other words, with the loss of the temple imminent, let's be able to supplant the world of Torah elsewhere, outside of Jerusalem. And this is what he does. And then we know of the journey of the Sanhedrin up through the north, from Ushat Shvaram to Beit Sha'arim to Tzipori, eventually to Tiberia. And it's with this that I want to end. Someone who lives 15 minutes from Tiberia, especially, and between Tzipori and Tiberia, I live in equidistant to both. I will just end with this idea. But Tiberia amukami kulam. Tiberia is literally the deepest of them all. It's 200 meters below sea level, but it's also just the deepest galut. It was where the Sanhedrin disbanded. And look at what Rabbi Yochanan says. Rabbi Yochanan, who taught and lived in Tiberia. Umisham atidin ligael. It is from Tiberia specifically that Geulah will come forth, will in the future be first expressed. Shneamar hidnari me'afar kumi shvi. As he quotes a verse here from Isaiah, shake yourself off and rise from the place where you were last active. So I find this idea paralleled with Yehuda, and I'll just end with a bracha for us all, that in this time of shiabud ligula, in this time as we lead up to the Zman Chirutenu, the time of our redemption, on a personal level, on a national level, may we take all of the glory that Yehuda has exposed for us, has taught us, has lit the way in our myriad centuries of Galut experience. And we have the omets, the courage to be the Yehuda, see the pivot of Yehuda towards Geulah as he takes us out from Galut, and the Nachshon ben Aminadav model, and the Yehuda Ya'aleh model of entering into Eretz Yisrael and assuming his place within Eretz Yisrael and incorporating the Goshen of Mitzrayim into Eretz Yisrael. So I thank you all for sharing this Torah with me. And now I'm going to look at the chat.
Can I say something? Bravo, bravissima. And I would say lahorot is lahodot. Yehuda was sent lahorot, but not just lahorot, but lahodot. I wonder whether any Rishonim draw attention.
I don't know.
To the
I never thought about that. I never thought about that, the connection of Hora'ah and Hoda'ah. What I didn't mention was that, as we all know, like David, is also a master of Hoda'ah, Hodu LaHashem Ki Tov, as the psalmist, is the one who wrote the bulk of Tehillim. Another aspect of Hoda'ah is not just admittance and acknowledgement, but thanksgiving, because you can only truly give thanks when you are in tune with Mitziut, with reality. Not if you're projecting something that doesn't exist, but if you can truly understand what the reality of that we are living through is, then the truest statement of Hoda'ah can come forth.
That is beautiful.
Okay, let's just were the Egyptians too nice, too accommodating regarding the sheep? There are limits to hospitality and other occupations. I think if I understand your question correctly, was it, in other words, was it too good for us that they were too accommodating regarding the sheep? I think that
no,
am I right with that?
I wasn't looking at it as the children of Israel. I'm just saying, what would, how much do you accommodate the foreigner or the immigrant? And they have a job that is irksome to us. So tell them, you want to come here? You can't do it. I mean, you have to have self-pride and self-esteem, and you don't let somebody do whatever they want. people come
Right.
from Africa, they want to practice female mutable,
Right.
that all that horrible stuff.
Right.
We say no.
So I think in this particular case, I would just say that the Paro didn't have a problem. He said, I'm happy to accommodate you. So it wasn't that. That's why I think of this word toeva as somehow we tend to think of it as misguided. Toeva generally think of as an abomination, as something that was distasteful or off-putting. I think that toeva, Rashi understands it as avodah zarah. In other words, sheep were revered. And so it was something that like there couldn't be an abundance of sheep, or you couldn't, it would be off-putting to watch someone handle a sheep or manhandle a sheep, which again, by the way, I'm really, I won't take off my intellectual integrity hat here when I say that sheep were absolutely eaten in Egypt. So they weren't revered the way that, there might have been a cult. I jotted down the name of the cult for those who are interested. You could just look it up online. Just look up, I guess like a livestock cult or sheep cult in Egypt. There were a few different ones, and one of them was located near the Nile Delta. So maybe that's
Hathor was one of them.
Hathor was one,
Hathor.
and then there was another one, but Hathor was located further down south, if I recall, and then there was another one. I'm sorry, it's just I have so many papers here, and it's escaping me. But that's something that now with ChatGPT is you could find more easily than I.
Tamar, Yeshika. Great job.
Pleasure.
May I add something? I have something to add just a little bit here.
Yeah.
First of all, when we look at Torah in general, and when we look at the story here in reference to Yehuda, Ein Mukdam V'Mauchar B'Torah. So we can't really put dates on this, not really, because it could be during the time of the Sea Peoples that conquered Philistia. It could be in the time maybe much earlier with the Hyksos invasion. So we're not sure precisely what that is. But we do know that Goshen is the name that was given to the Nile Delta region at some point, and that Goshen also in the Nile Delta was prone to flooding and the delta overflowing, which the Nile did in general. So it was one of the best lands because of the irrigation that was available, not because that the Egyptians didn't care for shepherds, but now the Israelites, the Jewish people, are becoming farmers in place rather than moving as nomadic peoples from place to place. Also, when it comes to Yehuda, isn't it fitting that Yehuda, who actually separated Yosef from his father by telling his brother, particularly Reuven, that we shouldn't kill, and this is in Vayeshev, in the Parshat Vayeshev, Lamed Gimel, that we shouldn't kill him, we should put him in a bore, in a pit, and therefore the Midianites came by and Midian and bought him. Shouldn't he be the one to reunite his father with Yosef? I think it's very fitting that we lead him to the Eretz Goshen as the leader, the wayfarer, to find the right way to Goshen, because it's not an easy route along the Philistine coast where you have these strong cities. If it was during this period, and if it wasn't, it's still a difficult route along the coast to find the Nile Delta as well. So it's a fitting exercise for Yehuda, in my opinion. But again, as far as history is concerned, historiography, etc., Torah is not really meant for that, and we should be aware of that. So, but it's a very
definitely. Although it is, I agree with you. Although I do think that it is perfectly fair game to examine not the Torah as a document of history, but how the Torah reflects history. So I do think, for instance, if we're talking about if we're talking about the historicity of Yetziat Mitzrayim or of Bnei Yisrael's experience in Egypt, I think that one can put forth different possibilities, and none of them are particularly, depends who you ask, but I don't find any of them particularly convincing one way or the other. There are two general schools of thought about, when Yetziat Mitzrayim happened. But regarding Goshen, Pitom and Ramses, the cities that they were charged to build, as being perhaps identified as like, Piaton and the city of Ramses within the Goshen, within the Nile Delta, would be another piece of evidence that
Yes,
Goshen
and in fact, the archaeologists have uncovered Ramses, Ramses, as the city of Ramses II. So that puts it around 1200 or so.
Right, which would then, I don't want to get into it, but it would throw off the whole biblical timeline. So
Right.
for those who are interested, though, the Yoel Elitzur does offer a different, not particularly compelling, but a different early chronology. I think these things, until absence of evidence is as good as we're going to get. But also Josh Berman wrote a lot on this for those who are particularly interested in the intersection. Okay.
Can I just mention one thing? My name's Gary, and I just want to mention that when you mentioned Imre Emes, and the whole idea of Havdalah, it was very exciting to hear that, because what occurred to me was every time we say Havdalah, we say Yehudim, Yehuda. Now, Sason has to do with tefillin, and Vika has to do with, I'm sorry, has to do with
Vikar has to do with tefillin.
Has to do with I'm sorry. So Son has to do with Brit Milah. Vikar has to do with tefillin, right? So Brit Milah is Avraham Avinu, and then connected that is tefillin, which is Yetziat Mitzrayim. And then we're talking about, in a sense, because what do we put in the tefillin? It has to do with Yetziat Mitzrayim. And then we have the light of the galut that comes with the Ner. So I just thought that was very helpful to understand that.
Well, that is very beautiful. I didn't think about those different deeper concepts. I always just as a personal note, and I know everyone has to, if you have to go, then you have to go. From when we were first married, we started a minhag that is a Hasidic, I believe it's a Hasidic minhag. When we light Havdalah, and the Havdalah has to be made from a strong candle, the Moreh Ha'esh, but then afterwards we take the light of the Havdalah and we relight our Shabbat candles, which are single, simple wicks of Shalom Bayit. And I think that the concept there is you take from the industry that you're launching yourself into the week, and you want to make sure that the kedusha and the holiness and the serenity of Shabbat also accompanies you into your week. I don't know why that occurred to me now in this context, but I think it must be because of these two types of fire. Okay, so I'm going to continue on with these comments. There's an opinion that Binyamin was first to jump into the sea. Interesting that Binyamin is the other tribe that is privileged. Exactly, Carol. Exactly. I direct you to that Gemara. That Gemara in Sota. No, it's not in Sota. I forget where I brought it. It's at the end of the source sheet. Is it in Sota? Yeah, it is in Sota, which talks about Nachshon ben Aminadab. It starts with saying that Binyamin is specifically privileged to have the Beit HaMikdash in his Nachala because of this, because of his initiative. Thank you, Dvora. Oh, you want the dessert? I don't know, Carol. If you're still there, I'll give you the dessert. Let me just go on. Okay, she's more bovine than ovine. I think Yitzchak Et Shalom posits that the toiva was not the sheep but the shepherds. Classic conflict. The farmer and the cowboy can't be friends. Agriculture versus people who want open range. I have to look into that. Never thought about that. That's the shepherds that are problem. Okay, so if anyone's still there and wants the dessert, Carol, you're still there. You want the dessert? Okay. This is so. Here's the Bnei Yissaschar. So Bnei Yissaschar is. His name was Tzvi Elimelech Shapira of Dinov. I have passing familiarity with some of these Sfarim. I don't ever remember who wrote them, and it's important to to locate them. He's from the early 19th century. Now, the Bnei Yissaschar, for the most part, speaks about the intersection of the Moadim, the months, and also the tribes. So this was something that I met in my mechkar, in my research on tribes. I didn't delve into it in my book or too early in my research because I hadn't developed myself enough to really think through the beyond, like Pardes is Pshat, Remez, Drash, and Sod. And so there were certain elements of that unity of Pardes that I just didn't have access to and I didn't quite understand. But later, over the last few years, I've been thinking more about the Bnei Yissaschar and his and how he picks up on the Arizal's teaching that every month has a corresponding Shevet. And the month of Nisan, which we just started, is corresponding to, of course, the Shevet of Yehuda. So initially, what the Bnei Yissaschar will say is he asked the same questions that I opened the share with. He said, why did Yaakov send Yehuda ahead? Why specifically Yehuda? And he asked an additional question, why is it written Goshna, Gimel Shin Nun Hey, as opposed to Goshen? Now, that's a real Hasidish question, or Hasidut question, because Goshna, in that diktuk formation, there are plenty of places that are written with the hey at the end, just because of grammar. But regarding the questions, this is how he addresses them. His broader discussion is about the meeting of Yehuda and Yosef. So for that, Bezrat Hashem, next Hanukkah, if Bezrat Hashem, I have an opportunity to learn again with you, I would love to talk about the Vayigash of Yehuda and Yosef, and I alluded to it a little bit, but specifically they meet in Goshen, and it's this encounter, this confrontation, which then blossoms into a harmonious relationship between these two major strains within Am Yisrael, between Rachel and Leah, between Yosef and Yehuda. So it is that context where the Bnei Yissaschar talks about this meeting in Goshen. The success of Galut is predicated on Yosef and Yehuda both being able to make their peace with Galut. Yosef is the mashpir, he's the one who provides in Galut. Yehuda is the religion. It's the dat, it's Yahadut, we get our name from Yehuda. Our religion is named after Yehuda, Yahadut, Judaism. It is the Beit Midrash, and it's the dream and the venture of Yosef and the pragmatic leadership of Yehuda that together form success in Galut. So when Yaakov sends Yehuda to Goshen, it is because Yehuda encompasses within him, and here's classic Hasidut, Hashem's name and the letter Daled. So it's the essence of Hashem, and Daled. Daled means the Arba Kanfot Haaretz, the entirety of the Galut experience, the four corners of the world, the Arba Galuyot, which is expressed in the Egypt experience, Vayhi bayamim harabim hahem, and it was during those many days. Harabim, Rabim is Rome, Bavel, Yavan, and Madai Paras, meaning, as I had alluded to earlier, the entirety of the Galut experience, whether it is contemporary Galut, whether it is the Galut of Yavan, whether it is the Galut of Bavel, it is all encapsulated and encompassed by the Egypt experience, which is why Pesach is such a foundational chag, because it symbolizes all of our Galut. Yehuda has to be the one to carry the name of Hashem to the Arba Kanfot Haaretz, to the entirety of the world experience, and to show Hashem within the Arba Kanfot Haaretz. So that is where the Bnei Yissaschar and that marvelous dessert comes in. I'll just end with this one idea, which is a very, very classic Bnei Yissaschar idea. He says, if you look at the word Goshna is Nun Gimel He Shin. right? Which we think of as the dreidel, the sevivon, Nes Gadol Hayasham, right? Is a reimagining of Goshen. Now, Nes Gadol Hayasham is the ultimate expression of galut. I always thought that it was a wonderful maila. It was a wonderful zchut that I have to have a sevivon with Nes Gadol Hayapo, right? Because, okay, here's where it happened. But for many, many, many hundreds of years, including the experience of the Bnei Yissaschar in Dinov, Nes Gadol Hayasham was the expression of remembering Galut as a time that we think of Eretz Yisrael, but we can experience the Geula within our lives. So there was no a possibility for the for Tzvi Elimelech Shapira, for the Bnei Yissaschar, to have a nes gadol haya po sevivon. He had a nes gadol haya sham, a Goshna experience. And as the way he put it, he says, within this piece of wood, he says, children play with a spinning wood top. And the wood symbolizes the pasuk in Yechezkel, where the prophet is told to take a piece of wood and on it write Yehuda, and take a piece of wood and on it write Ephraim, the symbol of Yosef. Bring them together in your hands and they shall become one. So in his envisioning of the spinning of this wooden dreidel, Nes Gadol Hayasham, what the Bnei Yissaschar is envisioning is this success, the successful spinning, as it were, around a central point of Yisrael, that that Yehuda and Yosef could meet in Goshen, Nesh Gadol Hayasham, encounter all of the glory and beauty of Galut, and then I don't know if I am sure that he dreamed of eventually having a Nes Gadol Hayapo. It's very, very deep Torah that I tried to present in this brief time that I have. But if you want more, I direct you to the Bnei Yissaschar. It's in Sefaria, and it's all there. Okay, so
Thank you so much.
let me just read this last line. I love Ruth Shane, your suggestion to Tamar's audience that Yehuda persuaded Paro to respect his brothers as a religious kiss, transforming him as Brahmin. This would also explain why the Egyptian Kohanim were also his beneficiaries. Yes. Okay, so I thank you all, and I wish you a Chag Kasher v'Sameach, and I hope we have more opportunities to learn together. Be well.
Excellent.